Hi, everybody. I'm BJ, the genealogy specialist at Maine State Library. And today I am not going to be talking. I'm going to sit and enjoy listening because Sam Howes from the Maine State Archives, who knows more about genealogy research in Nova Scotia than I do, is going to talk about how to find your ancestors in Nova Scotia. And so Sam should just take it away and have fun.
If you want to just monitor, because I don't know, I think you had said in the past that when screen sharing, you can't see the comments. So just let me know if someone
I will.
says something that I need to. So I'm going to try and share the screen now. Okay. So are you seeing the PowerPoint? Okay. So thanks for listening to me talk about Nova Scotia today, my favorite subject. So I'm just going to go through, it's going to be similar to BJ's talk last week on Quebec. I'll do a short PowerPoint and then we'll walk through some of the records. So brief history and then talking about the different types of records here. So I'm kind of talking about the population in my brief history. So basically you start with First Nations there, which is what Canadians generally refer to the Native Americans as. So the tribe basically focused in Nova Scotia is the Mi'kmaq tribe. And then later on you have the Acadian French settlers who move in. That's early 1600s that they're there. And then it's fought back and forth for over 100 years between the British and the French. Most of that time, the Acadians kind of stay neutral and just have their loyalty to whoever is in charge at that point, as long as they don't have to participate in any of the fighting. So they kind of come up with their own identity as a result of that. Sort of the last time the British really take it over is, I think, 1749. That's when they established the city of Halifax. And at that point, they have a big push to try and have the group called the Foreign Protestants. They were trying to get Protestants living in there to sort of keep the French out, essentially. So they settled people from, I think, Lutherans from France and other Protestants from Germany. And they sort of settled around Halifax and the Lunenburg area. So there's a lot of German heritage there because of that. Then in 1755, there's the big Acadian expulsion where the British forced the Acadians out and resettled them kind of around the world. And to kind of ensure that they don't try and move back to live in their land, they try and encourage some other settlers to come in and settle on their lands. And that group is mostly known as the New England planters. New England by that point was getting sort of overcrowded. Not by today's standards, obviously. But so they were kind of looking for land. So they took advantage of this. So that's late 1750s, early 1760s. You see a lot of that. Mainly Connecticut, Massachusetts seems to be where most of them come from. Then the next big population surge is with the Loyalists after the American Revolution. So they come in and kind of settle in with the New England planters, and they're given land for part of that. So that's where a lot of them come from. And then you just have things like the Scottish immigration, specifically in Cape Breton, in the Highlands, sort of. So there's a lot of immigration of Scottish people there, so much so that Gaelic is still on the road signs there. So it obviously was a fairly significant population. And then finally in 1867, Confederation happened and they joined the rest of Canada. Nova Scotia itself was its own colony for quite a while. In fact, New Brunswick was part of that as well until I think the 1780s. So so if you're looking for early New Brunswick records, you might actually find them in Nova Scotia because of that. So the first set of records I'll talk about are vital records and the census. So there's not much at the provincial level. They're recorded from 1864, which that might be the wrong date. I think it's probably 67. to 1877, and then for some reason they stopped recording them at the provincial level, and then started again in 1908, and proceeded to do that since then. There are some restrictions. Births are confidential for 100 years, marriages for 75, and deaths for 50. However, they're pretty good at every year when they're available, they digitize them and they put them out on the website. And they actually have their own separate website. It's the Nova Scotia Archives that do that, but they've started a separate website just called novascotiagenealogy.com. So you can do that searching there. And what I didn't write here is that this does include marriage bans back to like the 1700s. So there's other marriage records in there. And then for that gap between 1877 and 1908, there are some towns, I think Halifax might have continued to report through that time. So there's records for Halifax. And then there's also delayed returns, kind of like we get here in Maine sometimes. So you will get people, and they're interesting because you actually have a lot of information in them sometimes to show what they're using as a source for their birth date. They don't have, at least in my experience, the same level of vital records at the town level, but depending on what time period and what town you're looking at, you might find stuff. And I'll show you a couple of examples for that. And the census is similar to the US in that it's every 10 years, but it's on the 1 instead of the 0, so it's 1861, 71, and so forth. They have a longer restriction on them, so they only goes up to 1921. That's been released. And BJ referred to this last week at the Quebec talk, that one of the interesting things about the Canadian census is that they actually point out religion, which is helpful with other records that we'll talk about, like the church records. So that allows you to point to what record set or what church you would need to look to if you need to look at church records. So this is a few of the major websites that I've used in my own research. If you're looking at Baptist, which is a fairly significant population in all of the Maritimes, Atlantic Canada, the Baptist churches there all use Acadia University, the archives there, as their depository for their records. So that's always the place you want to start if you're looking for Baptists in the Maritimes, and Newfoundland and Labrador. And Anglican, which is another big one, most of them have been microfilmed and are available at the Nova Scotia Archives in their research room. And then you have Catholic records. Those are sort of spread in a couple different areas. A lot of them are in the Druin collection on Ancestry, which BJ referred to last week, or during the Acadian, or in the Acadian Druin collection. But some of them are also on microfilm at the Nova Scotia Archives as well. And then they have some other, like Methodist and Lutheran, I believe, for some of the other ones, and Presbyterian you'll find there as well. There's a website this guy does, his name is Dwayne Meisner. He has a website. I've been on there before, and they have some transcriptions for random churches. The biggest one being, I think I want to say St. Paul's in Halifax, which is the major Anglican church. So they have, someone's transcribed the marriage, baptism, and burial records there from like the 1740s through the 1850s. So there's a lot in there. And then much like here in Maine, you have your probate and deeds and land records. They're kept at the county level, just like here. They're available at Family Search for almost every county. I haven't encountered any issues when doing research, so you're able to go in there. Sometimes there's an index, sometimes there's not necessarily. I did find, I think it was Digby County I did have an issue with once, where the index is available on Family Search, but they did not have the records. But I think the Nova Scotia Archives has them. So I was able to just ask them, can I get a copy of this record? And they were able to provide that to me. So it worked out well. And then you have other sort of random land records like land grants. And I think I'll talk about a couple of them later on too. Newspapers is a big one. There's a few sources The Nova Scotia Archives has digitized quite a few and they have a separate sort of page on their website called Nova Scotia Historical Newspapers. And there's also a website called Canadiana, which has a lot of sort of just random things digitized, and that includes a significant amount of newspapers. And then there's a blog that I look at frequently when I'm trying to find newspapers, because this person seems to update it pretty frequently with any newspapers they can find. And the blog is called The Ancestor Hunt. So I always just search the Ancestor Hunt newspapers, and then from there you can find sort of the province or the state you're looking for, and it's a good list of newspapers that are out there, which ones are free, which ones are behind a subscription. And that covers, you know, there's a lot of newspapers that are on Google News that don't always come up in a search very well, and this tends to pick up on them. The only thing, there are various levels of searchability. So the Nova Scotia Archives one is not text searchable, so you have to browse. The ones I've found on Canadiana are text searchable, but that all depends on how well the computer picked up the text.
Sam, one question from the chat before we go further.
Yep.
Is there any delay on the privacy law on probate or deeds?
I'm not sure. I haven't done anything modern with them, so I haven't come across that. I've only ever looked at stuff, 1800s and earlier, so I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, I don't know for certain, but my answer to that would be that my guess is that it's not necessarily a privacy restriction, it's just what they've managed to get microfilmed and digitized.
Right.
And it may be that the records are available, most of those are public records in most places.
Right.
So I just wanted to interrupt before we went too much further.
Yep. Then there's other sort of random records. My first point is there's a lot of historical societies in Nova Scotia, so always try and find some of those. And then I found school records, and I found them in various places. The Nova Scotia Archives, I just found this recently, apparently has quite a few, and those were put on Family Search after they were microfilmed, so there's a lot of stuff there for several counties. There's Loyalist records, people kind of putting in their claim for lost property or various things. I've seen there's some poll tax records on the Nova Scotia Archives website, and a lot of that stuff has since been picked up by Ancestry and Family Search as well, so you can find it in other places also. And then Halifax explosion, which I talked about a lot because I'm fascinated by it. There's quite a few records at the Nova Scotia Archives for that. Okay, so that's the PowerPoint. I'll stop sharing for a second, and then do you have any questions before I move to showing some examples? No?
Sometimes your voice gets real soft. I don't know if it's where you're sitting by the speaker or what.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Yep. So one thing I'll show first, just because it's from our collections here, so I feel like I should show it, is on Digital Maine, we have a record of alien registrations from 1940. And this record is interesting because it kind of compiles all the information and shows the total number of people by county and where they came from, which I had it open. And where did it go? Am I screen sharing right now? Did I not do that yet? Let's do that first. There we go. So this is on Digital Maine, and it's a sheet that shows different statistics of where people came from by county and the total for the state. It's zoomed out, but I want to show sort of what's there. So most of them break it down just by country. This one happens to also break Canada down into the different provinces. So you can see there's a column here for Nova Scotia. And it shows a number of people who are living in Maine who were from Nova Scotia in 1940 who had not been naturalized yet. So it's about 2,000 people, so not an insignificant population, and that's not including those who would have been naturalized. So, but I just wanted to show that first. I just see a question pop up. All right, so family search is where a lot of these records are. So what I usually do for this is I go to search, and then I go to the catalog. And then for the most part, I'm usually, just for probate and things like that, you'll want to type in the county. So I always do Kings County. And so this is all the records that are available for that. So they have some church records here. If I remember correctly, these are just transcriptions though, for the most part. They aren't the original records. But they have probate here. And they've broken it down into a couple of sets. Like I believe probate records here is the sort of the volumes and the dockets and the index. And then up here are the actual case files. So usually you have to start here. And these are in an actual database, but not searchable. And then you can scroll down here, see the different books that are available in the microfilms, and then you can just click on the image, the camera icon to view the images and scroll through. I was thinking, maybe that's not the one with the index. Maybe it's that one. All right, yeah, so it has the index here. And let's just pick one at random. So that's what you see when you click on the camera icon. These are, I believe, alphabetical by surname, so you can kind of click and drag as you're trying to guess where you need to be. I wish it was properly indexed, but it's not, so. So this shows here, this is the person, the date of various things, and then that's the file number. And then you can go find the file from that in the other images here. So that was particularly useful for me. I had one ancestor who I couldn't figure out when he moved from Halifax to Kings County, and in his father-in-law's will, which he didn't marry that guy's daughter actually until after they were married, but in his will, I found a full bill basically for 13 years that this guy had worked for his future deceased father-in-law. So it was really helpful to prove when he moved there. Plus it's very good to prove relationships if they name their children. So it's a pretty important piece of it. And land and property, you're gonna find the same type of thing. And some of the counties did things a bit differently. So like this sort of divided it up by the 3 major townships in Kings County. So a little different where typically you just have everything gets put into one book like you would do here. Okay. I'm trying to think of where I found this other thing. So I'm just gonna search Nova Scotia as a whole. See if I can find the other records I was trying to find. Schools, that's what I was trying to find. So this collection here, you can see it's a pretty big collection, year-wise. If I click on that, I can see there's a finding aid at the beginning, which sort of lists all the schools, and they're arranged by county. You can see the different dates. So So let's find, again, a random one. 2 kings again. You can see they haven't all been imaged yet. So you can see here, you would need to go see the original film, but most of them have been done. So let's take a look at that one. See if I can find. That's not what I wanted. Somewhere in here, there are documents that actually list the students. There's one. So that lists all the students there. As you get later on, some of them list more details like their grades and specifically where they were living in the town, and it shows, you know, which school they were going to. So that can help sort of define an area in the town where they were living. So it's kind of a cool bit of extra information. All right, I'm going to get off Family Search. So this is the website I was saying. It's Dwayne Meisner. You do have to create an account. It's free. I was logged in. I must have timed out. So if you go up here to the main menu, can you all see my screen still when I've moved between windows? Oops. Okay, so this is, it's not going away. So under church parish records, I go under Nova Scotia. And then it creates this map by county, or you can search through here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go Halifax, and then it shows you all of the different records that they have there. Again, these basically aren't records, they're transcriptions, but they're a good start. So I can go to St. Paul's Halifax baptisms. And it's a very long list, so it probably takes a minute to load. There it is. So once it's fully loaded, the search bar comes up. So I'm able to then do a search. And it pulls out everyone with those last names. And it lists the date of birth, when it was recorded, and the name of the parents, and also where they were living and sort of the occupation sometimes. I haven't gone to order the original records yet, just to see if there's any information there that was not transcribed, but it's a good starting point anyway. And they have the same thing for burials, marriages, and then again for some other churches as well. Halifax seems to be the best one that I've seen, at least in the areas that I've researched. So then on here, on Ancestry, I was trying to find it, and I'm having a hard time finding that record set. There should be a Loyalist claims database. I think it's this one. Let me try. See if I can find the person who should be in there. Okay, so there she is. So there's a few different, I think this is all for the same person actually, but so this is a Loyalist claim. I think she was a widow. So it goes in. And basically it talks about her family. So it says her husband died a Loyalist in somewhere of New York. Left her with 8 children. So there's a lot of detail in there, and then it keeps going through, and I think there's more information about what they were given, and there's actually a full inventory here. So they're good info to find that stuff out. She actually lived in New Brunswick, not Nova Scotia, but it's the same thing. And again, at the time, New Brunswick was part of Nova Scotia, but I've seen the same type of record for my directly Nova Scotia ancestors as well. So I have been doing, I've done the census both at Ancestry and at Library and Archives Canada. I go back and forth between which one I prefer. If you know where the person lived, I prefer doing it here because you don't have to worry about spelling mistakes. But if you don't, Ancestry is better because it does sort of variations of last names, whereas this is very particular about what you get. So. Seems to have frozen. All right. What? Why did that work? Yeah, that works. All right, so there's different databases. It shows them all here on the left-hand side. I think most of the 1851 census in Nova Scotia does not exist. I did find on that Dwayne Meisner website that there are certain towns where someone has somehow found a transcription, but I don't know where they actually got it from. But so basically you're really starting in 1861 for Nova Scotia.
Yeah, Sam, you're fading in and out again, so.
Oh, sorry. Throat's getting dry, so I'm probably getting quieter. So I'll start, we'll look at the 1871 census. So you can search the census, or you can look at the districts and sub-districts. That's where it's helpful if you want to kind of get a feel for how it was divided up. So I'm going to look at Nova Scotia. And you can see it does it by the district, which is roughly the county usually. And then the sub-districts, which generally is the town. So that's sometimes good if you just want to search within a town specifically, because then if you go back to the database, somewhere, where'd it go? Right there. You can either search by the name, or you can go under here, click the province. But you can do both as well. Go under here, and then you can type in either the name or the number, and that other list here really helps define that. Like I said, some people I've found the transcription was so bad that Ancestry never would have picked up on it. So knowing where they lived, I was able to browse sort of just for the first name and knowing the town from here. So this is Canadiana. I haven't quite mastered how it's used, but when I do, so you can search by newspapers. I think there's a further breakdown somewhere. Yeah, so you can break it down by the types of collections. So you have your serials, which includes newspapers, monographs, and government publications. But I'm going to just do this because I know what newspaper I want. I always forget how to actually just browse for the paper you want, so I always have to use the search feature and find the title and then go back. And once you click on a specific one, if you click here, this will then bring you back to a list of all of the ones that are available. Then what you can do is once you're within that record group, you can do a search. So I'm gonna search here. No results. Well, that's worked before. But typically, that's what you would do. Not sure why that didn't work, but anyways. But let's just say we're browsing, click on an image. That's what you get, depending on the quality of the image. It's gonna be different. I'm assuming it was digitized from the microfilm based on the images I've seen. So it's of varying qualities. sometimes when you are able to search, things happen funny, like this little bit here, it'll come up as being on this page, but actually it should be on the next page. So you might have to kind of play around with your search results by a page or two. And so this is the website I was saying that lists the different newspapers. So I'm on the Nova Scotia page here. So you can see the different collections. So these are province-wide collections, and this is the one from the Nova Scotia Archives. Actually, no, this one is. And it lists the titles that are available and then directly links you to those pages. It's broken it down by what's available in Google News and Santa Fe University. And then it actually lists the Canadiana newspapers as well. So if you don't quite know how to search through there, like I tend to forget how to do, it's nice to come here and then find what you're looking for from this set. And then it also includes some pay sites, which it doesn't really include very many. So that's fortunate, I guess. So then we also have the, this is the Acadia Archives. So there's our digital collections, finding aids, and Baptist records. So I'm going to look at Baptist records. And most of the records aren't digitized, but it will at least bring you to the finding aid for the different churches. So you can verify. And again, this covers most of the Maritimes. So it's not just Nova Scotia. So you can search for a name. Let's just look at the first one here. So you can see it lists what's in the boxes with the file list. So they have minutes, membership lists, news clippings, indenture. That one's not particularly detailed, but the membership lists sometimes help. You're very rarely in the Baptist records do you find things like baptisms and naming the parents and things like that. So, but it's still useful to help prove where someone was at a given time. So we also have some township records that are available here, and some of these are on Family Search as well, but I wanted to show it here because there's a nice one that's in color. So if I want to search for Horton, and hopefully that works. Perfect, first one that came up. So they have their township record book here. And they've since changed it, luckily, because it used to be in like 4 separate pieces, and now you can actually look at it all in one, which is helpful. It does take a little longer to load, but come on. Maybe while that loads, I will shift over to the Nova Scotia Archives website. So this is their homepage. A good place to start, especially if you've never used them before, is their genealogy tab up here. And that brings you to the genealogy guide or novascotiagenealogy.com. I'll actually go right to that first because that's the Vital Records website I was talking about. So let me search for this guy. So this is the homepage here. You can choose whether you want to search for all 3 types of records. It does tell you about the coverage down here at the bottom. So I'll hit search, and then the first time you have to, or the first time each session kind of, you have to go through their terms, accept. And these are your results windows. So it breaks it down by your births. You can change over to marriages, change over to deaths. You can also filter your results a little bit. So you can choose a year range, a specific year, choose which county you want to look at. But I'm going to look at this one here. To view the record, you just view it right there. And it opens up. One sort of funny thing about this is I think as a way to prevent people from just downloading the images willy-nilly, they make it so you can't really see the full thing in a window at one time. So, but it does hopefully tell you which line number it's on, so it's pretty good indexing. So I know that the guy I'm looking for is right here, line 622. It gives the sex, date of birth, place of birth, father's name, occupation, residence, mother's name and maiden name. Also the marriage record, which is, or the marriage date. That's helpful, especially like this is a good example of when it is helpful because they were married before the province was keeping marriage records, but because I have their child's birth record, I know the date of their marriage. Then the mother's signature and the date of the registration. And the birth and the marriage and death records end up looking very similar in those registers like that. Let me try. Let's try this. So I'll show you an example of one of the delayed returns. So let's look here. So she was born during the time when they were not registering the births. So she had to file to get one registered. So I'm stuck on the screen here. So you can see someone, evidence of her birth, someone went through and looked at their family Bible and found the recording there. So that's how they verified it. What's tricky is that there is a little thing up here that shows that there's 2 pages. I missed that for the first few times I used the site. So you can see then it shows the actual new certificate. And you can see how much later some of these are. So she was born in 1887, but this wasn't filed until 1950. So it's also helpful to find, in that case, where someone was living when they filed for this. So I almost think she had moved to like Montreal, maybe not. But anyway, sometimes you find that, like I found one, she was living in Bermuda. So it was helpful to know that. So I was looking in the right country. And so let's try. And I'll show you a death record as well. So there's your death record. Pretty standard format, not too dissimilar from what you would see here in New England. Place of death, date of death, cause of death, parents' names, things like that. So let's go back and see if that's loaded. No. I'll refresh that and go back here. So I'll go back to the Nova Scotia Archives site and go to the genealogy guide. So you can see here they have the census and poll tax records. They have church records. So I'll show you. So really the church records, you do have to go in person, but this is a good way of finding out what they have at least, so you know if it's worth going. So we'll go down here to this database. And I can then look for a town I'm interested in. So I'm gonna look for Kennecook. And what it does is it shows you not just churches in the town, but churches where people from that town might have attended. So you can see it's coming up with the Catholic Church in Truro and the Anglican Church in Halifax. And then it also shows you which reels of microfilm you would need to look at for those things. The Catholic Church, Presbyterian, a United Church, and an Anglican Church, another Anglican Church. So it's really good to know what religion they might have been, which is why the census helps, especially in once you get to the 1870s. Because then you'll know where to look, especially when there's a gap in records. Like my great-grandmother was born in 1902, which is, you know, relatively modern times, but none of her and none of her siblings have birth records because the county was, or the province wasn't recording them but I was able to find all of their birth records in with the baptism records. So that was handy. I'll go back here. And it's worth at some point just kind of playing around their website because they have a lot of stuff in here. Like I said, the newspapers. So you can go right here to the Nova Scotia historical newspapers. Oops, that's not the right one. I was already in it. So that goes here. And then it lists the papers that they have available to research in. And basically you would just go, so let's just take this one, go here, and then it just shows them all. And you can click, and then it brings you right to the front page, and then you can search through. And again, the downside of this is that they were not run through the OCR process, so it's not, there's no text to search, so you have to browse, but it is something that's there and useful. There's a couple of, I think the state library might have one of the books, but there are a couple of books that have made indexes to vital records in papers. So you're actually able to find, you might be able to find an edition to go look in by using those resources. I think actually even Ancestry might have one of them as in a database form I found recently. What's one more thing? All right, land. So this is where I was able to find, so there's a few databases here. There's the indexes, Cape Breton Island petitions, and then Nova Scotia land papers. So let me just look in there. And I'm going to search for this guy. So I found a memorial for Jeremiah Marshman. So I click in there. It shows you the different sections and then the different pages within a section. So this, he was a Revolutionary War veteran for the British, obviously. And it goes down and it shows all of his different family here. Interesting thing with this is, though it doesn't specifically say these are his children, through marriage records in the Anglican Church that I was able to find out that they were, it actually shows us information about how these kids were born in Germany and these ones were born in Ireland. And then it doesn't say these ones, but I think they're born in Nova Scotia. So that was a little bit of extra information that was helpful for knowing about these ones. I think it's because he was in the British Army and was, at one point he was in Ireland, so somehow his wife must have been with him. I'm not entirely sure the situation with that. So those are the basics. Let me just go back to this. There we go. So this is the township record that I found at the Acadia University Archives. You can see it's been digitized here. So let's scroll down. It shows the cattle marks, which is a pretty common thing you would find here in New England as well. And then start showing the family records, which is, again, a similar form to what we would see in our early vital records down here. I don't know if these were done later or what, because they conveniently are all in alphabetical order by last name. So I'm not sure completely of the authenticity of them all, but there is this record here, which is handy. You can tell some of it definitely was more contemporary to when the record actually was created. And then things like this seem like they were probably added later. Yeah. So those are pretty much the basics. I'll stop sharing my screen and I guess open up for questions.
Yeah, there's one about the census on the only heads of household versus all of the family members.
Yeah. I want to say it's the same as Quebec. And
yeah, I think basically from 1851 on, it's like the British census and is everybody.
Yeah.
And earlier ones, it's hit or miss what they did. So.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Yeah, I'm looking for a will. The person died 1801, and it wasn't until 1805 that they made a claim against this person's property. And I've found it in somebody else's journal, and they've gone back and forth many times. And the widow went and made a claim against it for her children. He was in Lunenburg, but it was processed in Halifax. Am I going to find it in Halifax? Or I should.
If that's where it was done, I would imagine. I'd probably start there, and then if you don't find anything, try Lunenburg next. Yeah. But if that's the information you have, I would start in Halifax.
Yeah. He had several ships, and the widow's husband was the captain on one of them. Mm-hmm. And he fell overboard and drowned. And so is there any way to find out the names of the ships?
I haven't had much experience with that, so I'm not really sure.
I'll jump in and say that may actually be in a newspaper article, even that early.
Okay.
If it wasn't the captain of the ship, you may find that for. If it was somebody else, you might not. But there should be a trace of that somewhere. One of the things I am putting together, and I'm calling it New England's Seventh State, living along the coast, but it'll include kind of Nova Scotia as well, because that's part of that same economic social system.
They were living in Woolwich.
Yeah, so that may be as much in the Maine newspapers as Nova Scotia.
Okay.
And we have a question, where can you get information on the armories in Nova Scotia?
And again, I'm not entirely sure with that. If it's like here in Maine, I would guess you'd want to start with the provincial archives. That would be a good starting point, because they would most likely have the military records. Theoretically, it could also be you need to check in the archives in the UK, depending on when they were around and what army was really there.
Other questions? Yeah, Sam, great job covering it. I know from what you said to me, it's hard to try to cover everything in 45 minutes. But my goal on these, and Sam did a really good job, is to sort of show the range of what's available and the couple prominent websites that are specific to the state or province that will let you then go poke around and see what you can find. And now we have another question about cemetery locations. Do you know?
That's a hard one, because they don't really have, like we have with the Maine Old Cemetery Association here in Maine, where they've sort of done a good job of going around the state and collecting that information. I check, the standard things like find a grave, depending on when they might have died, the death record, if it's, 1800s or earlier, it's probably not going to be on there either. Sometimes an obituary in the newspapers might say the cemetery they were buried in. I know there is, I think some of the bigger or older cemeteries have sort of active associations that sort of try to track that information. So it's just a matter of kind of digging around and trying to find it. It's not really a simple, easy answer.
And some of them are in church records.
Right.
Okay, so she says she has the name of the cemetery but couldn't find the location. So yeah, I check Find a Grave. I don't know what the Canadian, off the top of my head, I'm blanking on what the Canadian equivalent of the Ordnance Survey in England or USGS here in the US is, but that would be a case where those cemetery names are probably in some sort of GIS database for mapping. So if you email me, I will look into that and take a look and see. I know I have worked with it in the past and the name is escaping me.
Another thing to do. Oh, go ahead.
So if Danny, if you email me, I will find it and send it to you. But there is that equivalent GIS, database for mapping in Canada, which is a great way to find those little hamlets that are not a separate town, or when somebody mentions they lived by a particular river, that sort of thing. So, but yeah, thank you, Sam, for I would have really struggled to do anywhere near as good a job. So, glad to have you guys, glad so many of you showed up. As I said, tomorrow morning, I'm doing researching Scottish ancestors, which ties in well with Nova Scotia. Yep. And tomorrow evening, I'm doing the Intro to Genetic Genealogy. What do your DNA results mean? If you haven't taken a test yet, what will the results show you? Is it worth you doing? So would be glad to have any of you show up at those. Also glad if you have friends, people in your genealogy group, whatever, who were interested, feel free to pass that on. Yeah, we're recording all of these and I am slowly migrating them. If you go to YouTube and in the search bar, search Genealogy Maine State Library, the ones that have been migrated to YouTube are there. Or if you go to Mainly, with Maine spelled like the state with the E on the end, mainlygenealogy.com. There are 3 posts that have the links to the various recordings of these. And with that, I'm going to stop recording this one.